Hello and welcome to the Chronicles of Dragonlance podcast, where my friend John and I go through every single book in Dragonlance, well, eventually, theoretically, but right now, just the Chronicles so far, a couple of chapters at a time. I'm your host, Shivam, and with me, as always, my dear friend John. Hey, John.
Hey, and with us today is a very special guest.
Wait, I'll get there. Yeah, no, I'm really excited because at the end of our first season, we had an interview with Margaret and Tracy, which I thought was super fun because, you know, they're really cool, great people, have great stories. And I thought it would be really cool that now that we ended our second book, we would have a different interview with one of the old timers, the Grand Masters of Dragonlance. And I'm super thrilled to have one of my all-time favorite authors and frankly, one of my favorite designers, Jeff Grubb, here today, because he created two things that basically are fundamental to my idea of Dragonlance: Tinker Gnomes and the novel Lord Toad, which is maybe one of the funniest books I've ever read. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jeff.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Also, before we get Dragonlance, I need to say this. You also wrote something that was super important to me because my main day job is talking about Magic the Gathering cards. And you wrote some stories for Magic the Gathering in the early dawn of the game.
Yes.
And one of the stories you wrote was it's a short story about Felden searching for his wife.
Mm-hmm.
That is maybe the best Magic the Gathering story ever written. It is the perfect encapsulation of the game. It's a text that I use to give to people when they want to understand what the world is and what the concept of Magic and the 5 colors. And it is also like one of my all-time favorite characters. So before we got too derailed in talking about Dragonlance, I wanted to just say, like, you have impacted two things that have basically driven my life for like 30 years. So I'm just deeply grateful for the chance to hang out.
That was Lauren's Smile was the short story.
Yes.
And in addition, did the when we first did a licensed series of books early on, and then when we relaunched it as Wizards of the Coastline, I did The Brothers' War, which was the first big Magic the Gathering novel. So that was a lot of fun. Yeah, the idea of being able to set down a lot of the stakes in the ground.
Yeah, the Ice Age trilogy, The Brothers' War, very, very impactful books.
Yes, but Dragonlance.
Yes, my one true love, Dragonlance. You were instrumental in helping design and create this setting. And I was wondering if we could go all the way back. How did you first hear about Dragonlance? Like, did Tracy bring it to the office? I
was the third guy in as far as at TSR, as far as working on Dragonlance. I'm sure Tracy told you the original concept of doing stuff about dragons. He and his wife Laura were talking about it as he drove out to Lake Geneva. And at the time, we were based in the old Hotel Claire in downtown Lake Geneva, which was this rickety 3-story building. We were on the top floor. We couldn't hold all meetings for the entire department on any one room because the building would fall over. We would drop pencils and see which way they would roll across the floor. There's all sorts of stories about the old Hotel Claire. And at the time, they were asking all the designers to come up with module ideas. Give us 3 introductory modules, give us 3 intermediate modules, give us 3 basic D&D modules, give us 3 Boot Hill adventures, give us, 3 board games, because we were doing little mini board games, sort of thing. And all of these, approaches. And Tracy's push was the idea of doing 3 modules that were set on dragons. And one would be on good dragons, one would be on neutral dragons, one would be on evil dragons.
Neutral dragons.
And from that base, expanded. Well, some of them are neutral as well. The neutral goods sort of all occupied the same area. And from that area, they said, yes, this is a great place to start. And Harold Johnson, the second guy in, was basically, he was working with Tracy as far as, folding it in and figuring out how they were going to do it, and doing it with all of breaking it down now into colors of dragons. So now we had, 10 modules, that were going to do a different dragon of the month type of thing. And I started getting involved with it as well. And I made some contributions to the lore and to the background. And we made a presentation to the brass about what we could do. Here is the tale of Dragonlance. Larry Elmore did 4 pieces of concept art that was for each of the, and by this time we're up to 12 modules because, we have to do one for the good dragon lord and the evil dragon lord. So we got that. So he did one for every 3 block set, Here now, the tale of the dragons of winter, and Tracy got. Larry Elmore did the concept art. Tracy got one of them. Harold got one of them. I got one of them. It's hanging downstairs in my in my study, and and basically was used later by Margaret for her first short story in Dragon Magazine. So people have actually seen this one. And it was of Karaman and Raceland. And they were, basically, and it had like Lord Toad was in it and a flying citadel. And at that time, the flying citadel was a castle on a flat plate.
Yeah, it looked so weird.
As opposed to what Park did later with that big, Roger Dean sort of, creation type of thing. So this was early on. And Carl Smith, who was our 4th guy, and he was an editor, he got the last piece. So that's what happened. And I understood this later. Tracy basically went around and talked to all of the people who were going to be at that meeting and sold them in before we actually had the meeting. So that made it a lot like things a lot easier. And we talked about books, and we talked about modules, and we talked about toys. We had the LGN. We were working with LGN. We were doing our own toys. How would we, bring it into toys? We would do a play set for the Percheron, for the big ship. And basically one of the adventures I pitched was of, basically involved going down through a whirlpool to a lost city at the bottom of the whirlpool. That may sound familiar.
Yeah, huh?
Jeff Easley did the art piece for it. So we picked up a lot of pieces from a lot of different places as we were building the world and as we were going forward.
That's so sick.
And and the progress was being made. We'd have what we call dragon lunches in which we would go to lunch and talk about Dragonlance. And and they do play tests for the early materials. In fact, my wife was the first Karaman, and she dropped out, and she and was replaced by Mike Williams. Did brought a lot to the character, but so basically, Tracy and I lived in the same apartment complex, Colonial View condos, and basically for a while he didn't have a car, so I was basically off being the carpool. And at this time, when they were doing the early play tests, I had shattered my ankle, so I was stuck upstairs. Working on Monster Manual 2 and some other things, and basically, and getting Marvel started. And so as Tracy was doing a lot of the maps and the background lore and talking, my main focus at that time, I was taken away and working on Marvel superheroes. So basically, it was a great opportunity, creativity on both our sides, and they were moving forward on this. And Margaret joined the team. Actually,
before we get too far,
sure,
I should have probably started with this, but I'm very curious. How did you get to TSR? Where did you find D&D?
I found D&D at college, Purdue University. I am a civil engineer by training, and I basically we had a wargaming club, the Purdue Wargamers, and I had played war games in high school, SPI, Avalon Hill, and I showed up for the wargaming club. And and in the corner there was a group of people who they didn't have a board, they didn't have any miniatures, they didn't have any tanks. They were just yelling at each other. And I said, "So what's going on?"
Noobs.
And somebody handed me 3 6-sided dice and says, "Here, we need a cleric." And it was all downhill from there. So I got involved in playing D&D, running D&D, brought it back to Pittsburgh, ran it for my wife's group and my to-be wife's. So we sort of bonded over Dungeons and Dragons, interesting date night sort of thing. And from there, got involved in running at Gen Con, which at the time was in Parkside in Kenosha, Wisconsin. We had a member of my group who had whose family had a mansion on Lake Geneva.
That's crazy.
So we would go up early, spend about a week at his place, and then go out to the convention and then go to college. So this was worked for a couple of years like that.
It's nice to be young, isn't it?
So I basically was in Lake Geneva after running as a DM for the AD&D Open. And one year, one of my friends mouthed off and said, "We could write a better adventure than that."
What's an AD&D Open?
The AD&D Open was the big tournament. This was before the RPGA got launched.
How do you have a tournament in D&D?
It's interesting. You have we have different ways of grading, how far. Usually the big one is how far do you get through the scenario? And various people would write different scenarios all the way through, different ones for every session, because people will talk after they get out of it. So you don't want the guys who are playing on Friday to know that you've got a Balrog and, from Wednesday. So you end up, so the AD&D Open, and Bob Blake was the guy who was in charge of it. And so one year, my friend, basically said, we could write a better adventure than that. And Bob was within earshot and said, "Congratulations, you've just volunteered to write next year's." And so we had to write like 5 or 6 different adventures, and it was myself, Jeff Liebman, Frank Dickus, and Len Lakofka, who was going to write one. So Len Lakofka was, basically, he was a name. He was known at that time. He had a column in Dragon and everything. So we did it, and we delivered it in, and soon afterwards, I was working as a civil engineer in air pollution control equipment. This was in the 80s when we decided we didn't need air pollution equipment for a while. And so I was laid off. I had time, and we delivered everything play tested by like February for an August convention. And on the strength of that, I applied to work for TSR. And it was, basically, it was a sort of thing of calling every Monday, how things are going. Have you looked at it? That sort of thing. Being a mild pest, but not a major one. But at one point, I had friends who were getting married out in the Midwest. I was living in Pittsburgh at the time. I called and said, "Hey, I'm going to be in the neighborhood. Can I come in?" And in the neighborhood means the wedding was in Indiana and the TSR is in Wisconsin. And so, okay, fine.
I'm in the time zone. It's fine.
I'm in the same time zone. I'm same part of the planet. Went up and I talked to Alan Hammock and I interviewed, and they offered me a job.
Damn.
They didn't offer me the job immediately. They basically, my wife called and said, call me. My fiance called and said, call, them. And I called them and found out that, yes, they'd like to give me a job. And the wedding I attended was made up of members of my own D&D group. So they were very excited about the fact that, hey, we're, one of our own is getting into TSR. But that's how I ended up at TSR and moved out. About 6 months later, I got married, and my wife moved out. And we, found a place, and everything else, the rest is hysteria.
Yeah, because I know you worked on the Manual of the Planes, which is one of...
Yes.
When I was a young man and first discovering D&D, that was like a book I had found in a used bookstore. Mm-hmm. And it was just so compelling to read and see how all the planes interconnect and the quasi-plane of salt or whatever the hell is going on.
Yeah.
And it was so sick. That's the thing. Those original D&D books were so good at just sparking your imagination and just making you oh, what is going on? This is so sick and neat. But yeah, so getting back to Dragonlance though, one thing that I understand is that when they were developing the world and really working on it, you had a lot of deep influence in how they shaped what ended up becoming Kryn and what becomes the core fundamental of what Dragonlance is. I also know that you created the Pantheon for Forgotten Realms, didn't you?
Yes, the gods of Kryn. Actually, Kryn, Trace tends to refer to it as Ansalon, and Kryn, we needed a name for the planet. And my brother was getting married to a young woman named Corinne. So Kryn translated across to Kryn.
Oh, that's so cool.
The gods came out of this is what I was saying. A lot of what we were doing, we picked up pieces and it was a group effort. It was a lot. I mean, Tracy was leading the parade, but, and Tracy knew he had a good dragon god, Bahamut Huma. and the evil dragon god Takesis. And I believe the name comes from Indonesian because he was his missionary work.
He was a missionary
in Indonesia. So, again, pieces carry over and are brought into the place. Anyway, my personal campaign, I had 7 good gods, 7 evil gods, and 7 neutral gods. And it had backstory and everything. But 2 of the gods were the Platinum Dragon and the Chromatic Dragon. And so that became our basis for basically he brought them all over and as we did, things changed. Mashaka was a male god in my original. Gilead, the book was Gilead, as in there is no bomb in Gilead.
That's so cool.
I had a book written by my pastor, Everyone in the Bible, by Reverend Barker. That's where a lot of the names came from for my pantheon and transferred over to the other pantheon as well. So I've had a lot of biblical names in my and that's just transferred over. And as it evolves, as it changes, they're there. But the foundation work is that's where they came from. So.
Oh, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Got any questions, John?
I was going to ask, were the moons always gods? Did that come from somewhere, or did it develop from, those dragon lunches?
The moons in my campaign were, the moons came from the gods in part, in the fact that we have 3 moons. Mine was Solinari, Luntari, and Nuitari. And basically they were white, gray, and black. And I believe Luntari became a red moon for that. And Tracy did the whole, how the orbits work and how they're going to, all fit together. And in my continuity, they were created by Rayorx the Forge and were the foundation of the All Saints War. And again, we pick up pieces and we change them. So that's the cool thing.
I love this. I wonder, did anybody ever think about what a world would be like if 3/4 of the evenings are just pink, where the light from the red moon is just shining on everything?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just because if there's a silver moon and there's a red moon, by and large, the red moon is going to wash out the white light from the other one. And it's just going to be like in a world of halogen bulbs or something, like going through a forever highway.
The whole thing, but we kept the whole concept of, basically it's an accessible world. We did not say to the artist, no, you must draw like this. So.
Yeah.
Do you know why they use steel for money?
Tracy didn't want to go with gold, to be quite honest. Because gold was a D&D thing. We needed a coinage. The idea of a bunch of gold. This is a post-apocalyptic world. A lot of things have gone, really bad. So therefore, the idea of steel made it, some different type of coinage. So you were not going to be awash in gold.
Did that come out of Tracy's desire to also make Kryn different in other ways, like the Kender not being stealing halflings and
yes,
no orcs,
no lycanthropes? Kender were originally Kinder, as in kindergarten, and they were going to be the German, and they were going to be tough kids. There's always a desire to make the halflings tough. We see that in a couple other worlds later on. But the idea was the Hobbit, which became the halfling, was very much this Bilbo, Frodo type of, character portrayed as slightly overweight, liking second breakfast and all, and having furry feet. And so he wanted to go a different direction with them. So they were very, they were a much tougher operation, Literally, I think one of the things that changed their direction to some degree was they did a Dragonlance performance at Gen Con. The first one was at Kenosha, and then they did it later in Milwaukee. And the actor playing Tasselhoff was Janet Pack. And, she was the cutest little hobbit. She was basically just the perfect Kender. And so at that point, we sort of swerved a little as far as, how we present it. Kender, by the way, we kept calling him Kinder, except everybody who read it said Kinder. So, okay, Kender is how it got its name. I mean, this is the whole basic. This is the time when things are still moving around, when everything is still morphic, and we're still learning about, what the world is and who these characters are. Karaman and Raceland. I don't know if you've heard this tale. Harold Johnson brought them to the table because we needed a fighter and a wizard, because that's, we're talking D&D here. Karaman was the caring man. He was, he was accessible and kindly and friendly and protective of his younger brother, who was the wasting man, because he was, thin and, emaciated and not as strong as his twin brother. I'm the one who gave Raceland his gold skin and hourglass eyes.
Oh.
Because we wanted to make him not look like your standard Mordenkainen Gandalf, Elminster type of ancient wizard, so he had a different look and a different feel. No pointy hat with stars and moons on it, so this was a different set aside. And, again, Larry Elmore did a fantastic job, bringing them to life.
That's so cool.
And Raceland was Margaret's favorite.
Yeah, she said that before. Was Raceland always in the early times? Was he always such a jerk?
Yes, he was. When Margaret arrived at TSR as a book editor, she had an autographed picture of Darth Vader on her desk. So we all knew, that she was one of us, and she wasn't to be messed with. So.
What did you expect the gold skin and hourglass eyes to do when you came up with them? Or was it just a cool image at first?
It was just a nice visual image that would have, set him apart. We had a large group of humans and half-elves, and how do we make these characters look different? Riverwind and Goldmoon had a very, Native American buckskin sort of look. In many ways, they were Tracy and Laura's characters to a great degree, as far as, how they fit into it. So, so we basically were looking at them as being iconic figures as well. So they could be easily recognizable. You could look at them and say, yeah, I know that character, at a glance.
I love that all of you came together and you brought, I'm bringing these characters.
Yeah.
And then another person's, I'm bringing these. And you created this whole party and a whole world that is really an amalgamation of a bunch of personal worlds that became a big public playground that is still being played in today. It's just amazing.
It was a potluck, but the big thing is the head chef was Tracy. Basically, he had the maps. He knew how he was laying out the plot of the first trilogy of the books was very much a drawing on the map as we're going through here, and we're going to go through the underground dwarven city. Okay, that's going to be a module, and we're going to go down toward the Arctic area, and that's going to be a module. Great ice boat art piece that Larry did.
Yeah.
And had walrus-headed warriors named the Thanoi.
Yes.
And that's another thing that that tends to show up in stuff I do, animal-headed humanoids. So, because you see them in everything was doing for TSR.
I thought it was funny when Shivan was telling me some of the rules when Kryn was set up that I wasn't aware of. I mostly come from the book side, and he's like, no dark elves,
right? Except
for the one, no vampires, no lycanthropes. And then, we're reading and it's like they go to Icewall and there's walrus-headed men. And I'm like, wait.
Yes.
You can have minotaurs.
Yes.
No wolf-headed people. No, some of the more common.
Well, look, dude, how do you want werewolves when you have 3 moons?
Yeah.
Well, also, it's the primary idea was avoid shape changers because the Draconians had shape changing abilities. So the idea that it was not well known in the world that these could, change their form. So that, basically, and that kept out doppelgangers, kept out lycanthropes, kept out a lot of, that sort of thing. And that's not used. And that's kind of cool because, a big drive in D&D worlds is often, we want to use all the toys. The Realms uses all the toys. Everything will fit in someplace in there.
Right.
Whereas Dragonlance made the specific.
Your setting of Al-Qadim just got transferred entirely, right?
Yeah, the Al-Qadim basically was attached to the Realms.
Yeah.
So basically that became
one of my favorite settings, by the way.
And had yakmen. So, again, the animal-headed humanoids. This is so yes, a lot of things with the Realms was, how can we we had orphan modules that didn't belong to a world, how do they fit in? And part of this was too, and I'll be honest with you, one of the reasons we were looking, developing Dragonlance is that the design team could not use Greyhawk as much. That was Gary's. And the people that Gary wanted to work with in that. And so, basically things would show up and, hey, we've got a new module. That's great. But, as far as the design team, we did not have the same level of access. So therefore, something like Dragonlance and later Forgotten Realms basically came on board just so we could continue to develop that, and while respecting, Gary's wishes. So.
Oh man, God, there's so many questions I want to ask you, but so I'm going to ask you two, and then you can answer however you want.
Mm-hmm.
One is, I know you worked on one of the Dragonlance modules for the Toma Huma, where you built inside the Silver Dragon, this whole huge dungeon within the Silver Dragon Mountain. Because we were talking about that when we were covering that part of Winter Night. And it's such a cool design for like going in there and up the throat and down and everything. How do you come up with a dungeon inside of a dragon? That feels so D&D.
Part of it comes from my engineering background. I mean, it literally was, how would I create this, because we wanted a big image. Again, we wanted something that looked really cool, that had a big effect on it. So it wasn't just another type of dungeon. And so the whole look and feel of that came out of, and I go again, Larry Elmore did a fantastic job on the art piece for it. As far as that interesting thing about DL7 Dragons of Light.
Did they do the art before you designed?
Sometimes we would have to do prototype art for catalogs. Often, and depending upon where it fell in the schedule, the art may be done before we get to the design phase. So they may work off a basic art order that we provided. In this case, give us a big stone dragon, that sort of thing. Ooh, that sounds cool. And then we commit to it. Sometimes we just get an art piece and have told this is what it's going to look like. Okay. Accommodate it. But if you had a release that was in like January, February, March, you tended to have your real art in the catalog. And as you went along, it got more and more prototypey in the TSR catalogs. If you dig up the old catalogs and take a look, you say, oh, okay, yeah, that one looked like it was done very quickly because they had to do everything for that, because we had to show every product.
The pneumatic tubes in the dragon castle.
Yeah. It's a very gnomish thing, yes.
I was just thinking, it's so cool as an idea for a dungeon that you play in. And then when you think about it, but like realistically as building a base, you're like, I don't know if this makes much sense.
No, it doesn't.
The tension of like converting the modules to story.
Yep.
Was there pushback from like maybe Margaret, like, hey, you can't put this in the module because how am I supposed to write this?
Interesting thing. DL7 was that hinge point at which the writers of the designers of the modules were now following Margaret and Tracy as the writers of the novels. At that point, they got ahead of the design team. So therefore so for the first, sections that all went up to that, it was very much they're following the plot. And you'll notice in the stories, we leave off after we leave Zaroth, and then we pick up on the Sea of Blood. So there's like two modules there that they did not drag you through. Okay, but they did occur, and they have, basically they refer to stuff. So from the behind the scenes, behind the curtain type of thing, you basically they jumped over and then continued on with the story. But that point was where they were no longer as bound to what we had said in the modules themselves. We had a Bible. We did create it. We did know what the plot was, but all the pieces we learned as we went around. So they went. So that was the tipping point for the game. And the second trilogy was very much, again, I mentioned Margaret's favorite characters was Raistlin and Karaman, and they took the stage to the front of the stage in the second trilogy.
They sure did.
Because the original plot and layout was done before Margaret showed up.
Wow.
I got to throw this in real fast. And Margaret is the hardest working author I know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Dragonlance would have been good. It wouldn't. I think that she made it great. So
it is insane to us that Winter Night and Spring Dawning came out like 3 months apart.
yes. Mm-hmm.
Like, that's just completely befuddling to me. Like, how did you do that?
Margaret was an editor in our book department. That's part of what happened. But it was also the fact of, we wanted to hit it, 1, 2, 3 really hard.
Yeah. Okay, I have to ask you about my all-time favorite thing ever, Tinker Gnomes, which have not only influenced Dragonlance, but literally gone on to influence pop culture.
Yes.
Every gnome ever now is an engineer because of you, instead of like being a random dude that talks to badgers. Where did Gyjax even get those first gnomes? They're so doofy.
Well, the first gnomes, we think, okay, because I do not have this confirmed, okay. Gary wrote a series of short stories in early Dragon. And in the last of those short stories that showed up, and it was under a pen name, that was an anagram of Gary Gygax. In the last story, a gnome appears. That's sort of the first canon appearance of a gnome. And as we went into Unearthed Arcana, basically, okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to add? And the gnomes, correct myself, I think, were the gnomes in the original Player's Handbook?
In the original first edition Player's Handbook, I believe they were. You have one, so I'm not going to open.
I believe they were, because I have one right here. So the idea is, how are we setting it apart from the earlier D&D?
Yeah, with fighting men and like wizard and
yes, gnomes were in the first one. I apologize for that. I had just it's been so long. Gnomes were in the first. How do we set it different? How do we set them apart? How do we basically make the races different than the necessary recruiting from the Council of Elrond? So that was that basically was, and differences were not necessarily significant. And yes, when I came on board, gnomes did take that steampunk sort of left-hand turn. In part because, again, this was changes that we made for the world. I mentioned I'm a civil engineer, and they are a take on engineers, where they will invent something, and then they will invent something to fix the problems that they created with the first thing they invented, and then they would basically create something else that would fix those problems. So it was a very comfortable, marriage, and it's taken off. There are, gnomes everywhere. And even though we still, say, and there are some gnomes that basically live a sort of hobbitish type life. No, these gnomes are just, are the ones people reach for. The original gnome, everybody who ran a gnome back in those days ran a gnome illusionist thief, because gnomes could be illusionists. So, and if you're going to be illusionist, you might as well double class into thief. So they were all gits.
Oh man, I love that you have an acronym for that.
Wasn't illusionist just like a random weird magic system that from the early D&D setting? It was like separate from...
Again, I was not present for Player's Handbook. I was still a fan. I was still running D&D at Gen Con, and we actually got the Player's Handbook as payment for running the game. So, we would show up because we'd get the new book, because they would all show up at Gen Con. I mean, everybody who's talking about, there's so much time between the releases of the books. Well, no, we had to wait a year, Yeah. We were old, the old guys, and we loved it, that sort of thing. So we were playing D&D for like 2 years before, AD&D for 2 years before the Dungeon Master's Guide showed up. So...
I think about that sometimes, that like didn't the Monster Manual come out first for AD&D?
Monster Manual was first. Yes.
Like, that's so baffling. Like, how did you, what rules were you playing with to be able to even use these monsters? Like OD&D it and then adding the AD&D monsters in?
Yes, we used original D&D. We used, some of us were using Holmes Basic, but I came in with the little brown box, fake wood grain box with the little booklets in it, and it expanded out. And at that time, you could add a lot to the game. So basically, we had the monster manual. We didn't have the experience points for killing those monsters. That didn't show up until we got to the DMG. So we had this weird era where we were playing AD&D, by what pieces were available and stuff that showed up in Dragon Magazine and that sort of thing. So
that's amazing.
You would ask about illusionists because I don't know, and there's a lot, and this is actually an area that I think needs some attention. I know a lot of people have written, John Peterson, Ben Riggs on origins of D&D, of basically that early, type stuff. But that whole, how did we get to hardbacks? Seriously,
Mm-hmm.
the original little booklets are just, are out of the miniatures world, And the Holmes Basic was very much done outside a house and basically came in and showed this is how you can do it, and for a basic introduction. And then we created a hardback, a very texturally dense hardback with all of this information and and it was mind blowing to see, there are races in here, there are weapons in here, there's spells in here, and there are illusionists. And I don't know why we have illusionists. Because illusions are tough, and by doing so, we sort of created the vibe of there should be other colleges of magic. So therefore, it has to swell out even more into the abjurations and the conjurers and the summoners and all of these, and that I think was a little bit a bit of a demand on the entire system, basically coming up with all the spells for that. But I do not know the origin of the illusionist. Probably someone who played in Gary's campaign and said, "Look what I have," because that's what happened for things like the thief and things for like the druid and that sort of thing, the monk. Usually they evolved out of a campaign.
Can you imagine that? Like, that's so wild to think about, that you're just creating something and then it becomes published, and now there's infinite billion people who are using your random homebrew idea to be the thing.
I think it's great. It's nice to see that people are still enjoying and playing with gnomes. And and doing all sorts of stuff, which I think is one of the things that makes me happy. I mean, I have not played in Kryn for 20-some plus years, so but it excites me to see other people are still creating, are still enjoying it. Margaret and Tracy are still writing for it, which is, I think, fantastic.
Yeah.
Are you still playing D&D?
I still play D&D. We are in the last battle of Lost Caverns of Archaea by Greg Gillespie, which is one of these big uber super dungeons. I'm holding my fingers up to show how thick it is. And we've been playing for like Monday nights for about 2 hours at a time for the past, 3 or 4 years. It's been going through the whole and that's very much old school D&D, kick the door down and fight the monsters.
Good times.
And we're in our last, what we should be the last battle. We've killed 2 of the archons that are threatening the area and fighting, and we just brought down the 3rd, but his giant Moander like swamp beast is now attacking everybody, so we have to take that down. So that's been our regular game session. Steve Winter, who is my editor on a lot of projects at TSR and WotC, is the DM. Myself, Stan, John Ratliff, who is an editor and is also a Tolkien scholar.
Oh, I know him.
Luis, who's a programmer, Sam, who was one of my producers at Amazon, and her husband, Derek, who is an architect. And that's sort of and Steve's son, Alex. So, so basically that's sort of our mob.
That's awesome.
And then a small group of us get together on Saturday nights and either watch old movies or play like Call of Cthulhu or right now we're doing a Pendragon campaign that John's running, that sort of thing. So we get a variety with that.
Oh, man.
Very cool.
Since I've got you here, how did you find magic then? Like, was this after like Wizards had bought TSR? How did you end up writing those novels?
No. Oh, ended up writing the novels. Wow.
Well, I mean, finding the game and writing the novel, the whole thing.
Finding the game it came out and was a big hit. And I actually traded with Peter Atkinson a copy of the Gray Box Forgotten Realms set. For the first Forgotten Realms set for 10 alpha decks.
Oh, crap.
And took them to, it's even better. And I took them to a gaming weekend with friends and gave them away. So I had 10 alpha decks, and I gave them away to friends who were playing the game because hey, it's a game.
Sure, why not?
It's a game.
30 years later, it still matter.
It's a game.
It's a game that you could have retired from with those cards.
Oh, one of them had a Mox Gem.
Ah!
Playing Magic the Gathering early, and I was an early, adopter. And it came into TSR, and Jim Ward traded for Plague Rats. Jim Ward, who was the creator of Gamma World and was my boss, he traded everybody for their Plague Rats and created the first Plague Rat deck among us, which is why you can't have more than 4 cards of any type, because he was just excessive.
That's so cool.
And among the people I taught to play Magic the Gathering was Brian Thompson, who at the time was the head of the book department. And we would go to Sue Wings, which was a local Chinese restaurant in an old Dog and Suds in Lake Geneva. It's still there. I saw it when I was out there last. And we would, eat Chinese food and play Magic. So basically, I had an in for it, and I left TSR at one point. I basically decided to go freelance. Was working with Margaret and her Magforce 7 group, and Brian called me up and asked if I would be interested in writing a Magic the Gathering book, and I said sure.
That's so cool.
And based on the antiquities, I said okay. I did the research. I basically went over all the cards, and we threaded through. There was a comic book series that was a predecessor, and we threaded everything through, and ended up creating, the Brothers War. And because that did so well, doing the Ice Age cycle, where we took the Gathering Dark and Shattered Alliances and Ice Age, and turned those into novels as well. And those had a lot of advantage because those sets were already done.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, they were working on it while the writer was, basically working on the novelization. So those were really enjoyable and a lot of fun to work on.
I think I'm going to need to have you on my other podcast, Casual Magic, because I want to go into deep depth about writing those books. But before I derail this one,
yes,
Lord Toad.
Lord Toad.
We have not talked about the novel Lord Toad, which is the best Dragonlance book.
Yes.
It is so funny, and it is so ridiculous. And please take us through your genesis of Lord Toad. How did that happen?
Again, this was the phone call. Basically, I say a lot of my life is someone saying, I know a guy, and they were working on a series. I was involved in creating Viewmaster Toad. We needed the low-level, slightly comic villain that locks up the characters right off the bat. And Toad is...
Also, Viewmaster is the best title ever.
I don't know if I did that or Tracy, but that I think it was Tracy who gave it that name. So it was, but again, it was a sort of thing of we needed a name. It was, he couldn't be an orc. So he was a hobgoblin, and Toad is sort of the name that I tend to give short, meaningful names to my characters. And Ed, who I've worked with for many, many years, he tends to just, sprawl all over the keyboard and, add some vowels, and he comes up with wonderful names as well. But it's just my tendency. So Toad's one of mine. And later on, of course, he shows up in a higher hierarchy position on the Sea of Blood. And so I got a phone call from Mary Kirchhoff, who was the then head of books, and saying, we're doing a series on villains. Because at this point we were, we wanted to do more novels from a variety of people. I had done short stories for various collections, always gnome stories. And so they knew what they were getting into about being, humorous. And they said, would you be interested in doing a Lord Toad book? And I said, well, sure, I could do a Lord Toad. Let me do the research and get back to you. And I did the research, and I basically, dug up, the old volumes and where he appeared and everything. And I called him back and said, he's dead. And they said, he's dead? Yeah, you killed him over here in a short story called Toad's Last Hunt, so he's dead.
It's so funny.
Can you work with it? And I thought about it and said, yeah, I can work with it. And that's where the basic idea of this as 2 parts Blackadder, 2 parts Roadrunner cartoon, where, we keep bringing him back to life. and, give a framework for it. And he is just was a wonderful comic character because we had characters that would be, that fit in with the world, but also were very comedic. And because I knew where a lot of bodies were buried, I could, from development, I could play with it. And it did have a character. We had the Knoll character change genders halfway through.
Yeah.
In the original drafts I had, it was not going to be a female character, but that was a reveal of what we had. And okay, this sounds so. I got to do a lot of comic bits. I got to have a lot of fun. It's the least serious Dragonlance story.
It sure is.
But it also it's very nice because it fits into the Dragonlance world. There was a writer named John M. Ford who wrote a Star Trek novel called How Much for Just the Planet. And it was the same sort of thing in which Star Trek is, epic and serious and got all sorts. And he wrote a funny novel. And that was my funny novel for that. That was my sole Dragonlance novel. I did a lot of short stories, but I did one novel, and that was Lord Toad.
I loved your short stories, by the way.
Well, thank you.
You're really, really good at that form.
It feels the comedic writing, fits really nice. I blame too much, BBC and Monty Python.
Can you mention Spelljammer, which is basically your comedic writing turned into a whole setting?
It turns into a whole setting. It's not intentionally comedic. The story behind Spelljammer is Jim Ward took the design department out to lunch at a local pub restaurant called Augie's in downtown Lake Geneva. And we were going to sit and brainstorm new ideas. And the waitstaff was convinced that we were a movie crew the way we were talking. And that Warren Spector was Steven Spielberg because there's a semblance there. So, okay. And we were throwing around ideas. And the idea I pitched was, I want a guy in armor standing on the deck of a ship in space. And he doesn't float away, and he can breathe, and all of this, the whole sort of Grubbian physics that she showed up in Manual of the Planes applies here, okay?
Mm.
And Jim really liked the concept. So that became one of our box sets for that year. The other one was Time of the Dragon by Zeb Cook, which went to the other side of Kryn.
Time of the Dragon is the box that introduced me to D&D.
Oh, really? Okay.
I was going to say, when you say Warren Spector, you mean like System Shock, Deus Ex, Warren Spector?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Warren Spector was the assistant design manager, under Jim for a couple of years. And he had worked for Steve Jackson Games, and we recruited him. And he wrote some stuff. He edited a lot of material. He wrote a Marvel superheroes endless quest book about the Thing. I think it was called One Thing After Another. So, yeah. And of course, then he went on to greatness. So yes, Warren Spector was one of us.
That's wild.
Oh, man.
The thing about Spelljammer that is just like, that I love so much is the GIF, the giant hippos with like the cigars that's sitting at the thing. I just, in my mind, they're all called Reginald, and they're just all very British, very like...
Yes, the British explorer look, yeah.
Yeah.
Again, another animal-headed humanoid. And I was thinking about this, and really, I think the origin of the GIF for me was an old cartoon called, Peter Potamus, it was a Hanna-Barbera cartoon in which he would fly around the world in his balloon with a ship underneath it.
Ah.
And, and he had a monkey sidekick, and, they would have adventures. And that was sort of where it comes. But he was very much that British colonel back from the Boer Wars.
Yeah.
And they allowed us to, expand more into a culture that used gunpowder, smoke powder, much more than, most, campaigns. Again, setting it apart, setting it different. The elves were very much British naval. They were very much master and commander. Very much Patrick O'Brien type of that piece of colonization. So and they were the evil good guys from the standpoint of they were lawful, they were organized, there were a lot more of them out there, and they were going to make your life miserable if you crossed them. So.
And how much of giant space hamsters do we owe to you?
I must take the blame on that as well. When we designed the ships, I was working with Jim Holloway, and I would say, I want a ship that looks like a hammerhead shark, or one that looks like a nautilus. Or one that looks like, you did a whole bunch of beholder ships. So we took all of them and we said, beholders are all different and they hate each other. Okay. That sort of thing. So so he was in the ship design, and I asked him for a gnomish ship, which would be look like two other ships that just sort of crashed together. So the front end was a sailing ship. The back end was a liner, and the middle was those side paddle wheels. And someone asked me, well, what's the purpose of the paddle wheels? What's in the paddle wheels? Because, you don't use it to churn through space. And I said, oh, those are big hamster wheels. And Roger Moore, the head of Dragon Magazine, was standing there, and he said, yes. And he got very, very excited about it. So much so that he wrote a 2-page monstrous compendium entry, because that's what we were calling it, on the various types of space hamsters. And there was, the dire space hamster. There was the space hamster of fear and flame. There was all sorts of, these types of the woolly, giant woolly space hamster. And of course, the miniature giant hamster, which looked like a hamster. And the Baldur's Gate guys thought this was great, and, and tacked him on with the Ranger. Okay. So now we have go for the eyes, Boo. Minsk and Boo. You go for the eyes. So Minsk had his pet giant space hamster that he insisted was a miniature giant space hamster and not just a hamster.
Yeah.
And would throw it into combat, go for the eyes. And then later on, for Mass Effect, which was from the same company that did the original, they had, it's one of the things you could buy for your room. You could buy a miniature giant space hamster in its terrarium. So it just keeps on going, man. And I love it. I think it's great.
My favorite Magic deck right now.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite Magic deck right now is actually Minsk and Boo.
Yeah.
Because they were ported into Magic the Gathering.
Right.
They made an Adventures in Forgotten Realms. They brought Minsk and Boo in. So I have Minsk and he throws Boo, and I have a custom Boo drawing that he was wearing a superhero cape because he keeps flying at people to go for the eyes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Anyways.
But the good thing is, and this is again, I'll come back to this, is the idea that when we create something, it goes on. And other people create, other people add to it, other people change things. And that's cool because that's the evolution of our games and our game worlds. It's not just one person, though Tracy is foundational to Dragonlance, and Margaret is foundational. But it's what we bring to it as we go along.
Yes.
And it's so much a bigger, better world because everyone else contributed to it in all those ways, right?
Exactly. So.
Oh, man. This has been an absolute delight, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining us today. Once again, I have to say it's a complete honor. You're like one of my all-time favorite designers and writers. You've impacted so much of my life in so many different ways. And I'm just glad that you were able to join us and share these cool stories. Is there any story you're burning to tell somebody? Because I want to hear them all.
No, I think I hit the big ones. Occasionally I go on about them on grubstreet.blogspot.com, which is my blog.
I follow the blog.
Which rarely talks about, the secret histories, but occasionally I get things together and, and talk about D&D in space, and other, secret histories.
Tracy said something about that first hotel you guys worked in. You could ride a chair from one side of the building to the other because it was slanted.
Oh yeah, it was terrible. They could have when they rebuilt it. By the way, they renovated it after we sold it. And there's a Kerwin's chocolate shop in the front room. There was a escape room in the back. Back when it was a hotel, there was a bowling alley in the basement that they used for storage. The Dungeon Hobby Shop was on the first floor, and it cost more for them to renovate the building than it would have been to tear it down and build an exact duplicate in its place. So. So this was a good piece of Lake Geneva history, the Hotel Claire.
Oh man.
Do you want to talk about what you're doing now so our listeners can know what we talked a little bit before Shivam showed up, but if you want to talk about what you're doing now and anything you're excited about, feel free.
Right now, what I'm doing and what I'm excited about and what I can't tell you exactly what I'm doing is I'm working as a senior writer for Elder Scrolls Online.
Oh.
I did part of the Necrom adventure and parts of the most recent one with Athelia and Golden Road.
That's sweet.
We've got the new one that's just starting to show up, and we're doing it in bits and pieces. So I'm doing a lot of writing for characters. We just finished a little short adventure, got it recorded. It sounds beautiful. That just makes me very happy and is very Grubbian in the fact that, it's got that sense of humor as well.
I love it.
I will not say more, but that's what I'm doing right now.
Very exciting. Thank you so much, Jeff. We really appreciate it. This is wonderful.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been a delight.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us for this special episode of the Chronicles of Dragonlance podcast. With me has been Shivam and Jeff Grubb. Say bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And we will see you all in September for
Dragons of Spring Dawning, starting book 3 of the Chronicles. And it's going to be a good one. Have fun.
Yeah, you got the classy microphones, and I got the little headset. So,
well, I mean, this is my 3rd podcast, so I'm kind of a professional at this.
Mm-hmm. I'm of the age where I'm very wary buying green bananas. So.